position. Rise up, make that decision. God will provide all your needs. He wants you to succeed. Have faith of a mustard seed. Get up on your feet. Rise up.
Welcome to the Drexel Seymour Show. Before we get into our show, I just want to thank our sponsors, Seymour Home Goods and HLB. Thank you for sponsoring this segment of the show.
We are HLB. We are a global network of independent advisory and accounting firms. We collaborate across the globe to build a positive and sustainable impact for better businesses and an even greater future for clients to grow and prosper. We promote trust and confidence by maintaining high standards to deliver exceptional work across advisory, tax, audit, and accounting services to a diverse range of industries. We empower change and innovation. We foster trust and transparency. We work together to create sustainable value. It's our purpose to make a positive and sustainable impact on the future of our people, the environment, and our communities. We are HLB. Together, we make it happen.
It's really a pleasure to have in my midst HE Governor Dakin.
That's right.
Yeah, sorry about that. Who has been serving the country as the governor for the Turks and Caicos Islands for quite a number of years now. And he's leaving us, and I thought it'd be very fitting to have a sort of an exit interview with the governor. And so I'm grateful for this opportunity. I know he's busy, but I appreciate the time that he's taken to agree to be on this show. So welcome to the show.
Thanks, Russell. And thank you for having me.
All right. Now, before I know the people watching the show are not from Turks and Caicos, we have a lot of international viewers. They'd understand, the governor role. Can you let us know how is the governor appointed in the Turks and Caicos or any overseas territory at British? Yeah.
So in some ways, it's somewhat mundane and very predictable. There's a job advertisement goes out. It goes out to the civil service and wider. You can apply. If you apply, you put in your CV and you put in a manifesto saying if you were fortunate enough to get the role, what would you do with it?
Okay.
And then you go through a whole process of selective interviews. In the end, they bring it down to two candidates, and those two candidates are put up to the Foreign Secretary, Prime Minister, and later, now it would be the case the King, in my case the Queen, who decides which candidate they're going to send.
Really? Okay. I'd be curious about that. What sort of stuff was in your manifesto?
Well, it won't probably surprise you, having watched what I've done while I've been here, but there was a really strong drive on national security, but there was also a really strong drive on, if you like, partnership with government.
Okay. So you probably never heard about Turks and Caicos before you came here. I don't know, but what did you do to prepare to come to Turks and Caicos?
Well, I did know.
Oh, you did?
I did know about the Turks and Caicos Islands, and I guess one of the advantages that I've had here is that I'm married to a Barbadian, Bayesian.
Oh, yes.
And so I've been in the Caribbean for 36 years, every year for 36 years. So I was sort of aware of the region, and I was aware of the Turks and Caicos Islands.
Okay.
But as you'd expect, an awful lot of reading to start off with. Texts, books, but going online, reading papers. I had dinner, and Mandy had dinner with all the previous governors, one by one.
Really?
And their wives, which was sort of fascinating to hear their stories.
Okay.
We talked to Turks and Caicos Islanders in the UK. But the most important thing I did, and it's sort of how I approach a problem as I came here. Myself and my family booked a holiday before I was appointed and before I accepted. And we just dropped into TCI.
It's a good idea.
And spent some time. And we flew over to Grand Turk, spent some time on Grand Turk. And I walked away, and I think I might have referenced this in my inauguration speech, absolutely bowled over by not what I'd seen, although I knew what I was going to see was going to be beautiful, but who I'd met, the people that I'd met.
Yeah, that is awesome. I think it's a very good idea before someone takes a job to come and visit the place and, see how it is, because some people come for the first time, they're surprised, whatever,
Yes.
Very good idea. How long have you been governor?
So I can tell you, my inauguration was on the 15th of July, 2019. So I'm into my fourth year now. I'll leave here just shy of doing 4 years.
Okay. And based on these 4 years, what are some of your greatest challenges?
Well, there were some challenges that I could predict, and those were serious crime,
Yes.
natural disaster, irregular migration. And then, of course, there were some that I could not predict. And COVID must sit sort of first and foremost amongst all of those.
Yes.
And then another that impacted on many others was the collapse of Haiti, while it's here as well. And of course, a hurricane. There was an election during COVID, another challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had to call out one, it
Mm-hmm.
has to be that period of COVID.
COVID. Yeah, that's probably a challenge for everybody worldwide. It was a game changer.
It was a game changer, and I mean, it's worth us just reflecting now we're through it.
Mm-hmm.
What a difficult position the Turks and Caicos found itself in at the beginning. So I was out of the country as we started to see COVID moving across the globe and flew back early. And I remember the first cabinet meeting we had in March where we tackled this. And if you like, we looked first of all at what did it look like from a health position. Well, our Ministry of Health had kept us well briefed about COVID, but we had 30 hospital beds. We had no high dependency unit, no intensive care, no ability to produce oxygen, no ability to test for COVID, very, very few consumables on the island. And a health system, as you know, designed to get people off the island if they're seriously ill.
Mm-hmm.
So the health position didn't look good. And then if you turn to look at the other side of that coin, the economy, we're the second place in the world most dependent on tourism and tourism through international travel. And we knew international travel was about to stop. So at the start of the pandemic, on both health and economy, it looked bleak.
Yeah. Well, I mean, despite the challenges, I'm quite sure there were some successes. So tell us about some of the successes.
Well, I'd first of all say that, as they say, failure is an orphan and success has many fathers. And so,
Yes.
and so if I talk about successes, it's really important to start off by saying they're not my successes, they're our successes. You know, an enormous number of people were involved in the things that I think have been successful. But the things I feel sort of proud to have been associated with, or I'm as pleased I was associated with. I mean, let's go back again and talk about COVID. So we moved from that position we were in to a position now where we must have been one of the countries, territories in the world that dealt with COVID the best.
Yeah.
And the evidence is there for us to see. We come out of it with zero debt, with our brand enhanced, with our economy booming, with much of our health system improved through having to go through it, and with, I think, a newfound confidence. That's really positive. And
yes.
So that would be my first. I think I put in behind that, because it happened during COVID, the election, holding an election, a democratic election at the time of COVID, and it was we had a new variant in the islands before we properly vaccinated. And for there to be a change of power and a new government installed within 6 hours of the election result was a good thing. I think produced stability. I think we've tackled the irregular migration problems well. It's hard to overstate, particularly for your international viewers, quite what a challenge TCI faces. I mean, to give an example, from Christmas Eve to a few weeks ago, we'd intercepted and arrested at sea over 1,000 migrants.
Wow.
That is something like pro rata 1 million people trying to cross the English Channel, or 6 million people trying to cross the border in America. And we are doing that. We're doing it successfully. And we're doing it in partnership with the US and the Bahamas.
Right. So you think that because I noticed recently the interception has been very successful, you think because of the partnership with the US has helped?
I mean, I certainly think the partnership has, but I also think that what helped was, if you like, when I first arrived here, starting from scratch, constructing a national security strategy.
Okay.
Building a national security structure around a secretariat, which allowed us to pull multiple stakeholders together, making some adjustments, bringing the radar under the maritime police, for example, so they worked in greater collaboration, more reliance on intelligence, and just supporting those on the front line. I think that's played a big part.
Got it.
I mean, tackling the extraordinary rise in crime that we saw during 2022, I mean, had to be done, and it had to be done very rapidly. And, that was a whole of government approach, working really closely with the elected government. and the police commissioner to do that. I mean, there are other areas, but I think those are the things probably I'll remember.
Right. Yeah, there are some good successes. But speaking about the illegal immigration, of course, we know a lot of illegal immigrants or legal people live in dockyard, and a lot of people have criticized you that the very first stop you made when you came to Turks and Caicos Islands was at dockyard. Could you elaborate on that? Why was that your first stop, or was that your first stop?
I mean, it wasn't my first stop. My first stop, if you like, was with the House of Assembly. My first stop was with the Premier and with the Leader of the Opposition.
Okay, so other than them, right?
But yes, in my first days, I went to dockyard, and I mean, I go back in some ways to my approach to life, which is, if there's a problem, go to it.
Okay.
And I think I recorded that on my social media account on the day that was why I was going there. And what I found quite interesting about people's reaction to that was that photograph, in a way, was almost like a mirror being held up for other people to see their reactions.
Mm-hmm.
And there were many reactions. For as many people that have criticised me, there are people that have applauded me. And I also think now, with 4 years hindsight, people can understand why that is. I mean, if there was an image that I would hold, I think, forever about my time in TCI, it would be that, because in those photographs capture every challenge that we've got, whether it's irregular.
You got a point there. Yeah, you got a point there.
If it's crime, if it's child safeguarding issues, if it's the whole building of irregular settlements, in that image is the story of the challenge that we've got.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories that come out of that. That's the point. I like your statement. You go to the problem, so you could understand it, visualize it. I do like that point. And you mentioned also about the crime. I know you made a statement that viewers also didn't like, where you said if the police commissioner resigned, you would accept his resignation. Mm-hmm. Could you elaborate on that for us as well?
Well, I always think it's incredibly lazy when you're faced with a crisis to call for somebody's resignation. That's exactly the moment you need them to stand up and deliver. And the police commissioners put an enormous amount of energy into modernising that force. And the fact that force didn't buckle when it came under extraordinary pressure that most forces could have buckled under. When your officers are receiving high-velocity rounds being fired into their vehicles, but they stand firm and return fire and engage, but they don't run, but they move towards, that is the sign of a well-led, motivated police force. That is not the time to remove the commissioner.
Interesting. Okay. I will say I'm 53 years old, and I've seen governors come, governors go, and I must say you're one of a kind. I see where you visit many different churches in the community. I don't recall any other governor doing that. Why did you do that?
Gosh, I guess it's under a number of different levels. I mean, first of all, faith is important to me, and family is important to me. So, and I get a great deal of strength from it. And I think particularly if you're in the role of governor, it's very important at least once a week to be in a room where you know you are absolutely not the most important person in that room. It's a very leveling experience. And, there's a set of personal challenges that come with being governor. I mean, when I left the UK, I left 2 wonderful parents. During my time here, I buried 2 wonderful parents.
Oh, wow. Sorry to hear that.
And so, faith becomes important at those moments. But also, I think, when I go to different churches, it is the best way for me to meet people where they feel both most comfortable and most, in many ways, energized.
Got it.
I learn a lot. I think we might have first met at your church.
We did. Yes, we did. Community Fellowship Center. Yes.
So,
yes.
So making those connections, I think, is really important. And finally, it is a sort of a thank you to the clergy here and the people that go to church. I'm pretty drained by a Sunday. And when I go to church, I just feel this enormous amount of energy flowing towards me, and it sets me up for the rest of the week. And so it's a massive recharge.
I like that. I love that response. That's awesome. Very, very, very profound. Now, as I say, you're one of a kind. And another controversial issue was the appointment of Honourable Harold Charles and Honourable Billiard. Of course, they are Turks and Caicos Islanders.
Yes.
But Honourable Charles is originally from Haiti, and Honourable Billiard is originally from the Dominican Republic. And many of the Turks and Caicos Islanders, they were against that. Of course, a few were okay with it, but many of them were against the appointment. In making those appointments to the House of Assembly, what were you thinking? I mean, what was the whole point about it?
Okay, so it was very intentional, clearly.
It was intentional.
I mean, the Constitution is really clear on this issue, in the sense that the governor has the privilege of appointing two people to the House of Assembly, but the Constitution gives guidance as to how that choice is made. And the choice is to bring diversity to the House of Assembly and to appoint people that could not normally be appointed. That's the first point. Then secondly, and it's not something you ever really particularly want to dwell on, but if we go back to the Commission of Inquiry, Chief Justice Auld, when he was calling out what were the causes of corruption in the Turks and Caicos Islands, one of them was the concentration of power within a relatively small number of people. And within that, within the Constitution, there was a route to help people to become Turks and Caicos Islanders. And at the point when I appointed my two members, the Islander Commission was not functioning and had not altered anything. And I thought it was really important for all the other people that are on these islands to have people that they could at least recognise within the House of Assembly. And I also thought it was important for there to be a national conversation, which I think there was a conversation happening, but it was a conversation happening in living rooms and in bars and in the press, but it was not happening in the most vital place it needed to happen, which is on the floor of the House of Assembly.
Okay.
And if the floor of the House of Assembly is where laws are passed that all of us that live in the Turks and Caicos Islands have to obey, I think it's important that people can see people, if you like, that they believe have some empathy with them there. Now, I really hope in the future we can move off that point. I think there's much better solutions to the one that I've described, but those have to be solutions that the Turks and Caicos Islanders resolve for themselves.
Yeah. So if the Turks and Caicos Islands Status Commission was formed, which you say wasn't formed at that time, if it had been formed, would you still make that choice, those choices?
I think it would depend on, if you like, the numbers of people that could progress to Islander status.
Okay.
So to give you an example, or for the last two years, because I could see this happening in terms of the number of files that I was signing off, all prepared by officials.
Right.
The number of people that were getting Islander status as compared to those that were getting BOTC and PRC status. So to give you an example, I think in 2001, around 1,300 people got BOTC and PRC status.
2001?
In 2001. Less than 50, I think, got Islander status. And that was through descent or marriage. In the next year, 2022, I think just short of 1,000 people got BOTC or PRC status. And something less than 40 people became TCI Islanders. And those figures extrapolate into this year as well. What that means is that for the last 2 years, and we can assume this is going to continue, for every 100 people that are going to live the rest of their lives on these islands, 5 people are becoming islanders. And so the delta and the vector between the numbers of islanders and everybody else who, as I say, follow the laws that are passed in the legislature is opening. Now, that is a challenge, but it is a challenge for the Turks and Caicos Islanders to solve. And it's why, for example, I can appoint the chair of that particular committee, but I chose not to appoint the chair. I appointed the chair, but on the advice of both the Premier and
Okay.
the opposition.
Okay.
It's a debate that you have to have, and you have to decide, not with absolutely minimal interference from
Right,
somebody like myself.
right. And the other members, there are 5 members, right? I think 2 appointed by the government, 2 by the opposition. I
That's
think.
right, 4 in total.
Oh, 4 in total.
So there's 2 appointed by the governor.
The government or governor?
Governor.
Oh, okay.
1 appointed by the government,
Mhm.
1 appointed by the opposition. So there's 4 appointed members in total.
Oh, okay. Okay. That's good to know. I know we have this issue with the status thing. It's a big,
Yeah.
It's a big issue. It's a big concern. I mean, me as a Turks and Caicos Islander, I'm open to people, but sometimes I do feel, I feel like an outsider sometimes in my own country, and so sometimes that's why we act the way we act. And I personally believe that the status should be a privilege. I think as long as someone has a residence and they can move freely in and out of the country, I think it's fine. But I find that there's not a lot of assimilation taking place within even those who we bestowed status upon. It'd be nice if we could assimilate with each other, and that's not happening. And that's what I find mind-boggling.
So 2 thoughts from that. I mean, the first is, I completely get where you're coming from. I mean, I think I have enormous empathy with the Turks and Caicos Islanders. My predecessor, by however many, that was here in 1980, there were 7,000 people on these islands. 7,000.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get to 70,000, certainly in the next decade.
Of course.
That's 10 times growth in population
Mm-hmm.
in less than a lifetime. Discombobulating. Completely discombobulating. It would be true in a village or a town, let alone a territory or a country. And the fact that we're growing at 4% per year, which makes us the fastest growing population, certainly in the Caribbean, is in some ways the biggest challenge the islands have got.
It is a challenge.
Because in terms of the delivery, let's just talk about the delivery of public service. The delivery of public service is difficult with a static population. But as the population's moving away, and of course 4% compounds every year,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes a truly, as they call it, wicked problem. So I do have immense empathy with this. And the second thought, as you described that, and I think you touched on it really well, is I don't think it's particularly helpful to rush to talk about the franchise, and that's why I don't, and you won't have heard me talk about it. What I think is much more important to talk about is, what is the nation? What is this nation, the Turks and Caicos Islands, and what is its purpose? And I think once that conversation is alive and active, a lot of other problems or a lot of other challenges sort of tuck in under it and start to become much more straightforward. Because assimilation can't happen until you've determined what your nation is and who's inside you.
Yeah, but I mean, HE, we used to assimilate. I don't know what happened, but growing up, we assimilated with each other. We had people from different countries. We hang out together. But now it's like we have this. I don't know if to use the word animosity. I don't know what's happening, but we have nationality just sticking with their own. We're not intermingling. Of course, some people are marrying other people, but the relationship with the different nationalities is not happening as I would have liked for it to happen.
Yeah, so I don't think you should beat yourself too much up about this, because I think it's a global phenomenon. I think, identity politics is something that we can see globally. And there's every reason why in the Turks and Caicos Islands, for the reasons we've discussed, identity politics has got to come to the fore.
Yeah.
And I think the reason why identity politics is so strong at the moment globally is because everybody can see that enormous change is on the horizon.
Yeah.
And that change is particularly linked to a whole range of different technical revolutions that are running, but it's also changes in the balance of power and so on. The first challenge is acknowledging that it's a challenge.
Yes.
And once you have, and you can sort of get over it and over yourself, and then have a conversation based on fact rather than emotion, I'm very confident TCI will get to the right answer, because I agree with you. I find the people in TCI, I mean, one of my abiding memories is will just be how courteous, polite, respectful, pleasant I've found being in their company. You've got a lot of raw material there to get to the right answer.
Yeah, true. Now, you mentioned franchise. You say you haven't talked much about franchise. Are you talking about the government's recent decision to go to the Bahamas, or are you talking in general?
Well, I think in general.
Okay.
In general.
Okay.
I mean, I wouldn't comment on the government's policy
Right.
to the Bahamas just because I wouldn't. I don't think it's appropriate for me to talk.
I got you. I got you. So you're talking about in general, we should determine what we want as a nation first before we reach out, whatever.
Right, because at some point, and there's too many global examples you've got at this, which is you do reach a tipping point where if people have no voice within the legislature, and consistently they have no voice over time, there has to be some form of correction. And the best way to have that correction is for it to be managed, and to be managed by the Turks and Caicos Islanders at a pace that you feel comfortable with.
Right.
Accentuate your life at Provo's newest shopping experience, See More Home Goods. Exotic, elegant, exciting styles from fragrances to frames, wide array of throw rugs and pillows, stylish lamps, wall hangings, table accents and vases, bed and bath, skin and beauty, collectibles, originals, and for sure, Seymour has great gift-giving ideas. Step in and see more than you'd ever bargain for. Le Petit Place in Grace Bay, next to Patty Place. Seymour Home Goods.
Okay, now, one of the problems we have with population too is that we have people coming in on work permits.
Yeah.
And I think we have been very generous and lenient, because the work permit's supposed to be temporary, and we just keep renewing the work permit, keep renewing. And so a lot of people are saying, well, we have over, 40,000 in this country, and only, 7,000 people on the voters list or 9,000 on the voters list. It's not fair. But what I normally say is that most people in the country, as far as I know, they are work permit holders. I may be wrong. I have to do my research on that. Because I have a friend from Australia. His son went to Canada, and he's on a work permit for 2 years. And after that 2 years, the Canadian government told him he has to go back. Now, I realize in Turks and Caicos, we don't have enough of our own people. So we have to bring people in. And I think part of the problem we have in this country is that the work permits continue to be renewed. People this is like their home. They continue to be on the work permit. And so now we have this huge population who people feel like, they're not being represented. That's what I believe is the case,
So I'm sure that's right. And I mean, successively now this problem goes back way over a decade and beyond. You've ended up with a position of essentially accidental citizenship.
Yes.
And that is a root cause of many of the issues that we've just been describing. And actually, although I spend an enormous amount of my energy thinking through and working with others to defend our borders and maritime borders, actually, far greater problem sits in the area exactly that you're describing.
Yeah.
Now, there are relatively simple routes through this. I mean, you started to describe one. You can have a policy where you can have a work permit for a set period of time, and then you must leave the territory before you come back and the clock starts to tick again.
Mm-hmm.
That would be sort of one option. I think the government's drive, and the UK government are supporting them in this, to bring in e-identity and e-government.
Yes.
That should be something of a game changer on this.
I think so.
We can properly understand. We can properly understand who we have. But there's a third group actually that you haven't described, which are the British Overseas Territory citizens.
Oh yes.
And this, I think, is where the focus needs to be. The work permit holders are here temporarily, and they should leave, and that should be the end of the matter. But those that are British Overseas Territory citizens, and those that you've given permanent residence C2.
Mhm.
That's a different story completely.
Mhm.
Now, we know from the stimulus package, when it was rolled out to both Turks and Caicos Islanders and BOTC,
Mhm.
that a little over 5,000 BOTCs were able to
Qualify.
qualify. So let's say that your voter list for Turks Islanders is 9,000. You know, you've got at least another 5,000 adults here that are going to live the rest of their lives here with you.
Mm.
And then those numbers that I gave you earlier, about 1,000 getting them a year, of course, they're not adults yet, so they can't claim the stimulus. They're children.
Mhm.
But that is an issue that is moving towards you and will realise
Yeah.
soon. And I think you've got time and space now to work this out, but you need to use the time and space that you've got.
Right. And in the British Overseas Territory, these are individuals who've been here 10 years or more, right?
Yeah, so there's different routes into it. And what I'm not going to try and attempt to do is explain it to you because people will use my words as the gospel way
Oh,
to get there.
okay.
But there are different routes through it. But essentially, it is through residents. And many of them, if you like, moved from being work permits to permanent residents to BOTC. So you've got some control over this. But once they've reached that point, you haven't, because it's the British Nationality Act that kicks in. And that covers all of the overseas territories.
Right, because we are British Overseas Territory.
Correct.
Okay. Now, you've indicated earlier, which we know, that you've seen a change in government. So you've worked with both governments. And in the past, we've seen, now based on what I've noticed with you, is that you've worked with governments, no matter who it is. But based on some previous governors, it's like they were working against the government. But you seem to be looking at the manifestos of these. In fact, I think you mentioned at one time in the previous administration, your job is to work with the government to make sure they fulfill the manifesto. I think that's what you said at one time. Tell us about that leadership style. Yeah.
So I don't think my role is to make sure they fulfill it, although I'm really impressed with how governments here try to fulfill it.
Yeah.
But it's definitely to support them. I mean, it seems to me...
Maybe support is the word I should use. Yes.
I mean, I'm a small d Democrat by nature. I feel very strongly about the power of democracy and Western liberalism and so on. And so if that is for real, and it is with me, then if a government is elected on a mandate, it would seem to me that the governor's responsibility is to support them. Now, there's certain ways you can support them, and one of them is keeping them within the ministerial code and code of conduct around good governance. That's really helpful. Helping them stay within the law and so on. But my role as the chair of cabinet is not to drive my view. It's to elicit as many views as we can.
Got it.
To generate the best possible answer.
Okay.
And one of the things that I've learned here definitely is the power of, if you like, the crowd. The group around the cabinet table, and this is true with both governments, almost always, in fact, I can't think of a time it hasn't happened, we've come out with a better solution in cabinet than the solution that was first offered through intense and good debate and everybody having a voice.
Well, that's good. And I think that's very good to know, because I know it shouldn't matter on the personality of governance, but it seems like that's how it matters. So thank you for that.
But I think you're right. The personality of governors does matter, and of course the personality of the Premier matters as well.
Yes.
And I think I said this in my inauguration speech because I, if you like, done as much research as I could. I knew that in front of me as I spoke on both benches, I thought I had two exceptional leaders, and I thought both leaders, any Caribbean country should be grateful to have two people in those positions. And I've very much enjoyed working with both premiers. And of course, you're tied together because one of you can't succeed without the other. So I may be in charge, if you like, of the police force, but I can't raise taxes or spend money. The only person that can raise money and spend money on the police force is the Premier.
Right.
So we're handcuffed together in a way in terms of the success of the police force.
Right.
And on almost every issue, the two of you, imagine in the pandemic, if the Premier and the Governor had walked out of the cabinet room on different messages. You've you've got to work together as a team.
That's important. Speaking about the government, I know I may be wrong, but I think you're very instrumental in the regiment here in the Turks and Caicos Islands. Tell us about that, because I know you have a lot of background in military.
Yes, I was. Although I served in the military so long ago, it's almost as if that was somebody else living that life.
Oh, okay,
So I draw memories, but I mean, the regiment came out of the review that we did at the very start of my time as governor about what is our national security strategy, what are the main threats, and most countries would recognise the threats that sit in our national security strategy. Let's say cyber would be one, but there were two that stood out in some ways as greater than all others, and these are slightly unusual compared to most countries. The first was natural disaster, and the second was the destabilising impacts of irregular migration, which we've talked about. The regiment was formed to support those two major priorities, and that's why it has those two roles.
Okay.
And I mean, again, what I'd say about sort of shared success is just overwhelming support from the then Premier, overwhelming support from the then Leader of the Opposition. I think when the Defence Act was passed on 2020, both benches stood up and applauded.
Right.
And I think what I'm most proud about the regiment, apart from it's out delivering for us every night, is that it's a symbol of national unity and national pride.
Absolutely.
And it's something about the identity of the islands going forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your contribution on that. I also noticed with your leadership style, which I also like, you seem to get involved a lot with the community. We have already established that. But I noticed, I think I read about a year ago, maybe more than a year ago, where you invited, I think, about 25 young people to your home. I'm not really even aware of any of our leaders doing that. Why did you invite these young people to your home? I believe that's what I read.
No, you did. You did. I mean, I spend actually quite a lot of my time with young people in different ways, but that one it's the one I think you're describing. That was a group of young creatives.
Yes.
Yeah, and so in that group, we had film producers and artists and musicians and dancers and individuals that went on to run a film festival and so on. And I mean, what an exciting group to be with to start off with.
I imagine.
Secondly, I really do think that when we talk about diversifying the economy, there is a lot of focused effort that's looking, say, at financial services. But I do think we may start to generate a USP here. I think if we can focus on creativity and digital space in these islands, we could attract extraordinary talent here.
I agree.
The gaming industry, by which I mean those that write software for PlayStation games and the like, that is bigger than all of Hollywood combined.
I know.
And why wouldn't we, rather than young people writing that in snowbound Canada, why not have them here?
It's a great idea, actually.
And it's that group, I think, that most excite me in a way. And I think, actually, thinking of the final reason, it was at a point we were rolling the vaccine out, and I suddenly worried that, and I include myself in this, that government was sounding very lecturing, particularly to young people around the vaccine. And I thought it was really important to not just inform, but also embrace at the same time.
I do like that idea. Very good. I do like the idea about that industry that we need to tap into. Because, a lot of the young people are interested in that. In arts and stuff. And I think we need to, it's a big opportunity, I believe, that's been overlooked. So thank you for that. And speaking about that, I noticed too that, on one of your trips to London, you visited the Lion Den?
The Lion King, yeah.
The Lion King. I always say the Lion Den. And I visited as well. And I saw you in the audience. There's a picture of you in the audience with the Turks and Caicos flag. And that was awesome, wasn't it?
Yeah, it is. And we went because Raisha Hicks was on stage. So Turks and Caicos Islander, I think at the time she had probably the most complex role on stage, the most technical role on stage. And anybody that knows she's a phenomenon. She's in the UK studying bioscience. When she was back here in the Turks and Caicos Islands, she was part of our public health team that was going out doing community testing. She's professional dancer in the MTV Awards in Tokyo and opening The Lion King in London. That's the sort of talent we need to get behind and just celebrate and applaud.
Absolutely. I was in Manchester, and I rented a car. I think it took me about 4 hours to get there, because I said I'm only there for 3 days. Went to my daughter's graduation. I said I have to go and see the show, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad, and I encourage anyone who's going, to do that. It just shows support and solidarity behind our own, doing that. Now, another compliment I want to say about you, I think you do a very good job in communication, and I think that is one thing I believe that our government, this government and successive governments, I think need to improve on on communication. I see you communicate really well. Sometimes I don't even know what's going on until I read your posts. Do you write your own communication? Do you do your own stuff? Or?
Yeah, no, everything I write, I'm writing with my thumbs on my phone.
Okay.
Communication is the other side of the word leadership. You cannot lead if you're not communicating, and particularly I don't really feel I'm leading. In many ways, I feel I'm supporting leaders.
Okay.
Helping leaders. But how can they lead if they don't know the direction of travel? And that's what communication is about, or it's about education. To be fair to the elected government, it is much easier for the governor, who has much less to worry about in many ways, to just personally communicate.
Point taken on that.
It is easier. But the thing that I've really enjoyed about using social media, and Instagram in particular, is that it's given everybody a direct line to me if they choose to use it. I mean, I must get 20 or 30 direct messages a day, which I read.
Really?
Yeah, I read everyone, and I try and answer everyone. And it gives you a wonderful sort of fingertip feel for what's happening. And people generally, when they're reaching out to me, it's worth saying, first of all, very respectful. And secondly, they're generally coming to me when they are at the end of a road. They have tried in multiple different ways. Yeah. So I've enjoyed that sort of connection.
Okay. All right. That's good. Well, the communication is good. I really enjoyed it. And you're right. You're right. It's totally different from the elected officials. Now, of course, you're the chair of the cabinet, and I also see that the government has recruited a consultant to talk about looking at the Constitution.
Yes.
Do you think, based on your 4 years here, do you think we deserve a revised Constitution?
So the word "deserve" is loaded. Deliberately so. Okay. But that's fine. It's important. So let's just unpick it a little bit. So
okay.
What's the purpose of the Constitution? And I mean, the purpose of a Constitution is it's trying to deliver many things all at the same time. It's certainly trying to lay out the processes and procedures and ways of government. It's also very important in protecting the human rights of a population. And finally, it's a conversation, if you like, between the power of government and powers that should not be laid on the people. In other words, it's a balance here. So if you sort of go back to perhaps the most famous constitution in a way, the American Constitution, it starts in an enormous, albeit secret, conversation between a Virginian approach and an approach out of New Jersey, where one is saying the Constitution should be written around the number of votes any state has. In other words, the population size. And the other is talking about the rights of states. And in the end, they come to a grand compromise where, if you like, one house, the House of Representatives, is based on the numbers of population. but the Senate is based on equal representation within it. In other words, that constitution is a compromise between two competing ideas.
Yeah.
And that constitution has only been amended 27 times. It's 27 amendments in its entire history. And to amend the constitution takes a great deal. You need 2/3 to vote in both houses, and then you need 3/4 of the states to agree.
Okay.
So that's a long introduction. But when you say, do the people deserve a new constitution? Again, we need to describe, who do we mean by the people?
Well, I mean us as residents and citizens, because
Right.
our elected officials sometimes say their hands are tied because of the Constitution. They don't have enough power, so to speak. And if they have a better Constitution, they're able to make better decisions and stuff like that.
So I guess that's a really important point to say, that this constitution has to serve all the people of the Turks.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
Well, what I do not think the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands deserve is the 2006 constitution.
2006?
The 2006 constitution failed almost immediately. It resulted in extraordinary debt.
Well, I don't know if it's the Constitution. I think it's how people use because I don't think the Constitution failed. I think it was the personality of the elected officials at that time, how they ran the government. I don't think it has because of the Constitution.
But I link the two. So I think the Constitution has to work. In fact, again, I think I said this in my inauguration.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution has to work not just in the best of times, but in the worst of times.
Mm-hmm.
The Constitution is the final, if you like, safety check. Because the UK should not be the final safety check. The Constitution should be the final safety check. So with regard to the present Constitution, I mean, the one thing people, I hope, can say is that it's given over 10 years of stability. And, unquestionably, where we are today is in a good position. And we use that constitution, and in fact, we used emergency powers in that constitution during the pandemic without, I think, any huge democratic deficit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think it's therefore for those that wish to change the constitution to make the argument as to why they need to change parts of it, and why it's going to be better for the people, not for the politicians, why it's going to be better for the people, the collective people.
Yeah, it should be about the people. Mm-hmm.
And it is, I guess, on this point, finally worth saying that actually, while I've been governor, we have been changing the constitution. And I think we've been doing it in a much more sensible way, if you like, than a sort of a grand conversation with the UK. I mean, we've had 2 constitutional changes, which in the US Constitution would be 2 amendments.
Mm-hmm.
So the first was that we increased the number of ministers in cabinet. I think that was a wholly good thing.
And that was recently then. That was under this, just when...
But both have occurred under the present PMP.
Oh, okay.
So the first increases the number of ministers. That releases the Premier to be the Premier. So there's a dedicated finance minister.
That was good.
And then the second, we took what might be both the most contentious issue, but in some ways the most important issue to the people, which is Crown land.
Very contentious. Mm-hmm.
And took that out and dealt with that as a standalone issue. And we've got a route forward now on.
Oh, yes. That is true. Yes.
So I think the way, personally, I mean, I won't be here when that constitutional conversation happens, but I think we've shown that you can change the constitution in quite important and dramatic ways, but by taking issues one by one and dealing with them one by one.
Okay.
Let's see though where it goes.
Yeah, we'll see. Now, speaking about constitution, speaking about the UK, of course, we've been a colony for years. I know sometimes when we get frustrated, we say, let's get independence. And I would think that, of course, a lot of people don't talk about it. I mean, I did a show on the pros and cons of independence. I don't know much about independence. So I was able to connect. I think Honourable Wendell Swan connected me with someone from the Eastern Caribbean or the U.S. Virgin Islands, who is an expert who goes to the United Nations, and it was very, very, a rewarding conversation. Do you know the UK's position on independence for the Turks and Caicos? And don't you think, can we call the mother, don't you think they should be preparing us for independence? Don't you think?
So the UK's position is extraordinarily clear on this. I mean, it's caught in a white paper, but it's also linked to all of our positions in the United Nations, which is, rock solid commitment to self-determination. In other words, it is for those people of the Turks and Caicos Islands to determine their future.
Okay.
All of the power in this part of the relationship resides entirely with you.
Okay.
And no power resides in the UK. The UK could not force the Turks and Caicos Islands to be independent.
Okay.
The Turks and Caicos Islands could become independent from the United Kingdom.
Right.
And the only reason that you remain an overseas territory is because in the 1960s, the people decided that they wanted to be part.
Rather than going with Jamaica or the Bahamas.
Right. So should the UK be preparing you for independence?
Or even a discussion, talks.
No.
Yeah.
So the UK will not generate that discussion.
They will not. Okay.
That is not to say, and neither would they not want that discussion to take place, but that is a debate and a discussion that's got to be generated from within.
That's something we need to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think if, for example, if we'd reached the point while I was governor where you'd got to the point where that debate was in full swing and you were moving towards some form of vote on this, I would be silent.
Okay.
I would not, as governor, be making the case for you to remain part of the United Kingdom. It is for those in the Turks and Caicos Islands that wish to remain part to do that.
Yeah.
And of course, this is our position with all of our overseas territories. And so if you use the Falkland Islands as an example, I mean, they had a referendum recently where 98% of them voted to remain part of
Okay.
As an overseas territory.
Okay.
Now, their circumstances are very different.
Okay.
But all of the power, it's really important, this, all of the power sits within you. And then I just pick up on the word colony as well, because technically you're correct. But the word colony suggests an extractive relationship. And there is no extractive relationship between the UK and TCI. In fact, the flows go in the opposite direction. Support comes to you. And I think in terms of those who wish to prepare for independence, it's really smart not to snipe at the UK, but to engage the UK. Bring as much support and capacity and capability building as you can. The regiment's a really good example. Bring as much as you can from the UK here to help develop you, to get yourself into the position that you can do that in a sensible way.
Okay. Well, we're almost to the end of our discussion, but of course, we address a lot of challenges, we address the successes. What else do you think, from an independent point of view, not sitting as the governor, what do you think we need to do to improve? What other things you think we need to do for our country to improve?
Well, on my to-do list, there's about 1,000 things. And I think the Premier's list is longer, and
probably
the positions would be the same. Deputy Governor. But I think let's leave it on a sort of a lighter note, but serious note. But which is that as the British governor here, I actually feel very relaxed about, in some ways, how few obvious ties there are to the United Kingdom if you're in the Turks and Caicos Islands. I believe we drive on the correct side of the road, and there's the flag on my car, and the Union flag sits in the corner of our national flag, and so on. But actually, there's an enormous amount of impulse that, if you like, the cultural impulses coming out of the United States are very, very strong here.
Very strong.
And that's, although cricket remains the national sport, very few people here.
Even though we don't play it.
But basketball and NFL and NBA.
Soccer.
When I go to Remembrance Sunday, I'm stood next to people who have relatives serving in the US Armed Forces rather than the UK Armed Forces, and so forth. And so in some ways, since you took so much from the US. Why did you take the one thing that you should never have taken from the UK? And the one thing you should never have taken from the UK, and we've got an excuse for it. You know, we've had 2,000 years, including the rise and fall of an empire and so on. You know, we are broadly pessimistic people that can see the downside, whereas Americans are generally optimistic people that can see the upside. And I would implore the Turks and Caicos Islands, take that bit of American culture, because you've got so much to be optimistic about for the future. I think if you can solve the population issue that we talked a lot about, if you can solve that, your future is unbridled and fantastic. Yeah. And you know, I just wish you the very best of luck for it.
Thank you. Well, can I end the show talking about you? I mean, I don't know. Are you? Is this the end of your career? Are you retiring, or what is next for you?
Well, I've served 40 years for the British government, so this is the last job that I will do for the British government. But I'm not using that retirement word. I think I'm using the graduation.
I agree with you. Graduation. I like that.
Right? We are definitely going to do sort of Control-Alt-Delete when we leave here, and we're going to go and do a 3-month road trip that takes us from the Mexican border with America to the Arctic Circle. In fact, the Arctic Ocean.
Oh, nice.
And back. And then we're going to spend the foreseeable future anyway in Barbados, and we'll build a new life for ourselves in Barbados. Sort of watch this space.
I know I'll see you back in Turks, though.
I'm sure you will.
Yeah. Do you have anything that you want to add that you think we have not covered?
No, just well. I mean, I'd just thank you actually for the work that you do in terms of keeping people informed, going after the facts. Civic society and journalism and media is a really, really important part of a democracy, and you play a really important role in that. So thank you for all you do.
Well, thank you, HE, and I really appreciate this opportunity. I wish you the success in your graduations, as we're not using retirement. And I want to also thank you for your contribution that you've made to the Turks and Caicos Islands. I don't think that the people will forget you from me. Thank you.
That's great.
All right.